How do we know when we're live?
We're live right now.
Oh,
Hello, Midday. We're so excited to
Live.
be able to join with you guys. We're as you know, for those of you guys that are joining us online here at New Life Church, every Tuesday we have an intentional time set aside to discuss and to actually bring a practical plan and a practical step towards whatever the sermon was for the previous weekend. So I'm welcomed by the wonderful, amazing Pastor Manuela over here.
ooh, the wonderful and amazing.
That's right. And then we got
I'm just
Jeremy.
Jeremy.
And Pastor Jeremy, my wonderful, incredible friend over here. And so basically, this past weekend I had the opportunity. It was such a pleasure, such an honor to be able to share with our churches. We're 4 weeks deep into this Imagine series and this Imagine campaign. And for me, I know that a campaign also communicates movement, direction, but oftentimes when I think of campaign, I just think of finances. And for us as a staff, as we've gone to a place of prayer and really strategized about this, yes, we need finances to make things happen. But for me, there's so much more in the way of just a culture and shifting a culture. I've heard people say that have done a lot more studying and a lot more research than I have. Actually, shifting a culture takes tremendous effort, tremendous intentionality, a plan, a strategy, if you will. And so what we're going to do a little bit today, we're going to identify the 4 points that we talked about and talk about how do we practically do so. And so whenever we talked about the idea of imagining a better story for a church, for a community, for a generation, the 4 things we discussed was number 1, we have to first identify what is broken within that generation. We kind of centered the teaching this past week around the book of Nehemiah. And so practically speaking, Pastor Jeremy, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. How do we actually identify what's broken, whether it's within the context of children and students within our church or in our community?
Yeah, there was the quote that you said by Reggie Joyner. Is perspective depends
proximity
on proximity
always changes everything.
Proximity always changes the perspective, or changes everything. But it was, I think that quote was really helpful. Is, you know, as a parent walking with my kids, and my kids are still really young, it's easy to kind of keep them away from certain things. But then when you start to hang out with middle schoolers and high schoolers, really 5th grade, their eyes are opening up to a world, and the way that we saw it as kids is already tremendously different. I'm not that old. I'm only 33, and but even hearing what they're going through, I was like, oh, I didn't see any of that until I was, my late 20s. Like, oh, y'all are fighting this in high school. And I think what happens is the more that we push ourselves away from the world, we miss what's happening in our kids that are growing up in the culture of the world. And we're called to be of the world, but not in the world. Like, we're called to be in the world, not of the world. Excuse me, said it wrong. And so if we are not engaging in their lives and engaging in their scenarios, it's easy not to have a burden and say it's someone else's. But the more that you get involved in people's lives and the need and all of the things that you see in their lives, the burden comes through relationship. The burden comes through relationship with God, comes through relationship with kids, it comes through relationship with people. And the one thing I think that's important in this is my burden is not just for my kids, it's for other kids. It's not just my own thing. And so I've even seen, what's been cool is even in our church, is people who don't have kids, people who've wanted kids are picking up this own burden to see the next generation raise up and love Jesus. And yeah, I think proximity creates a burden. Proximity with the Lord and proximity with our kids as we're stepping into this.
Yeah, it's not uncommon for me to show up at my home on any given day, and I could walk in, and Adrian's just like, heads up, there's 8, 9, 10 children or teenagers in your backyard. And so, roll out there, they're running around. And one of the things that my kids, they have an array of friends all over the spectrum, different values, come from families with different values, different beliefs. And I think one of the things that has been a challenge at times is to find the balance, Pastor Manuela, to find the balance between what does it mean to protect my own children and what does it mean to teach my children to be light and salt, and for me to model that amongst their peers and amongst their friends. And I know, probably similar for you, neighborhood kids, school kids, church kids. Even the church kids ain't necessarily reflective of some of the family values that we have at times. Have you identified anything in your own life that to find that balance, if you will, between protecting yet showing them what it means to be light and salt?
That's a heavy one.
I
I think it's a combination of different things. First of all, one thing I think that has to change in our own hearts is we actually have to genuinely care. I think everyone, especially kids, are phenomenal at seeing through, like, this is fake, and they won't give it 2 cents, versus if you really genuinely care, they actually want to be there. And so as our kids have been growing, something I've asked the Lord I want to be intentional about is I want to know their friends. I want to know these other kids. Not so much I want them to become like our kids. I just want to know who you are. And something that I felt has really helped is just opening up our home. And so it's not so much, we'll do stuff outside with them, but I wanted everyone, especially our daughter is the oldest, and so as a teenager, I wanted her friends to know they're always welcome at home. And the day I started hearing them going, I can't wait to be in your home, I love being in your home, I felt like we crossed a bridge right there. Now they're comfortable to be in your space. They see how you live. Now that's the thing, when they come home, they see you. And so a part of, we're also going to have to be ready to live, for these kids to be there. But one thing that has drastically changed my perspective is these teenagers I'm watching. They are being thrown, I think you mentioned now, with things in the world that we've never had to process. Some of the things I'm just hearing now, and they're only in 8th grade, and I'm like, what? We weren't discussing these things back in 8th grade. And so what I realized is part of this journey, I said, okay, Lord, I don't just want to try and figure out this young generation. My heart is a generation who will walk alongside with their parents. Specifically this season, I have a joy of leading a life group for moms and daughters. And so these are teenagers. The youngest is 12, but she's like an 18-year-old, up until 15, 16. But I said, Lord, I don't just want to have a group and connect with girls. I want to have moms connect with their daughters and to begin building deep bonds of friendship. Because something in me says if you and your mom have this thing, there's not a friend who's going to influence you otherwise. Even if somebody says something totally off the chart, you're going to come home to your best friend mom. Not that I'm not saying moms are supposed to be friends in this stage, but there's a safe place. And so this season of walking with 8, 9 girls, we moms have grown. We had a session one time and the girls are sharing their dreams and how they process. And we left going, I finally understand my kid for the first time. In the context, they're little people. But that place, I felt it elevated them. They felt like we're growing enough. Our title was Biblical Womanhood. So they all felt like, oh, we're women, But I'm like, you are. It's just, it even elevated. It's not like, oh, these girls, these little kids. They feel like they give ideas. Sometimes we'll sit and I'll say, what do you girls want us to talk about? And they started throwing out topics they want to address. I mean, there was no kid gloves. But I would rather they want to talk about it with their moms, their parents, versus some influence at school. And it's what I'm realizing is I think this whole journey is both a science. I think there's some things you have to do, but it's also an art. Some things just have to happen, in the beauty of life.
So definitely one of the things I'm hearing you say is just an incredible authenticity within this generation, a transparency. There's been times where I've kind of struggled with our family ministry motto or our vision statement is to know the name, know their story, be praying for them, like you said. And so it starts with knowing them. It starts with empathy. It starts with compassion. Compassion, root word, Latin word. It's to come alongside and suffer with. And so it's significant whenever you process the idea of having compassion for a generation, actually, like you're saying, coming alongside, suffering with them, empathizing with them. But, I've struggled with it in family ministry, because it's not, to disciple the next generation, to take on the world. It's not laying it's nothing like that. It's just kind of the bare bones basics. But whenever we look at Nehemiah, early on in chapter 1, that's pretty much where it started. That's the foundation block, as he named it. He identified what was going on in the community. He knew the story, he knew the background, and he went to a place of intercession. And so, at least our belief is that if that framework or that foundation can begin there, then I think once the heart of God is involved, once empathy is involved, once compassion is involved, once you start interceding, then I think discipleship is the natural next step. It's just going to happen, And so where I've struggled with that in the past, I've been reassured that, what, this is biblical. This is God's heart. So when we start there, it's going to happen. The second point there that we were looking at this past weekend is what we're capable of, not in and of ourselves, but what we're capable of in concert with God. And we kind of use the analogy from Lion King, where you got Simba recognizing the significance. I know Pastor Jeremy was clowning my roar. My wife was giving me some tips on how to do a better lion roar for next time. But what it was like whenever Simba in concert with Mufasa, what he was capable of, and likewise in our walk with God. Jeremy, can you speak to a little bit of the individual? It could even be the parent, the grandparent, the single, the individual that just say, you know what, man, I am so intimidated of kids. I'm so intimidated of teenagers, and I'm not trained. I'm not gifted. I'm not capable. What?
Yeah. In Nehemiah 1 and 2, we know the process between when we hear 1 and then we hear 2 was the course about 4 months. And what's interesting to me is that for 4 months he fasted and he prayed and he was consistent in the place of prayer. And then one day, I often wonder, why was he so sad that day? But his own distress in the moment brought the king's what, we know that the king could have killed him in that moment, and yet the king, his wife being there, he showed compassion and the history of that. But I think a lot of times is partnering with God doesn't always look like that one moment that is just whew, God just moved, right? I think partnering with God started when he sent the scouts. It started all the way back then, and God was working something in them. So it's the consistency of saying yes to the Lord in the small things that lead up to a big thing. And I think sometimes we don't like the consistency. We want it to be done really quickly. We want the weeping, the fasting. God, it's been a week, 4 months, you're there, boom, it happened. And I think
some of us, a week is kind of a long time.
We
thinking 20 minutes in. We
fasted is praise the Lord. But I think if we are willing to be consistent in a kid's life, meaning that there may be an opportunity that comes up where you're able to really speak into them, and you don't see things until years later, oftentimes, of the influence that you've had in these students' lives. And it's the partnering with God by praying for these kids, walking with these kids, doing the things that God called you to do, to be the voice of reason when it feels insanely. And oftentimes it feels like when we're doing it, it feels like, you want to do your roar? No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. Don't do the roar. But it feels like you're just this little cat you're not making a difference. And the idea of it is oftentimes you don't hear the voice of the Lord roaring over their lives, and you feel like all you're doing is being consistent. Sounds like the cat, but it's making a roar in their lives that you cannot see. But yet, in hindsight, now me personally, I grew up at New Life. I grew up in the family ministry at New Life, and there was one guy who took influence into my life. He was strategic about it. He cared about the things that I cared about. His name was Terrence Palmer. He moved to Chicago, and he was consistent. I had no idea why. We were terrible kids in church. We were the worst kids. Pastor Dan told me when I came on staff, they would have staff meetings to discuss my life. Like, what are we going to do with this kid? And so if your kid is like that, there's hope, I promise. But he doesn't, I don't even think, I don't know if I've actually ever told him the amount of the roar that he had in my own life to be interested in me as a Christian, even though I tried to push him away, interested in the things that I liked. Like, it's so intriguing how God, I love shoes. If you don't know this about my soul, I love shoes. But yet, I'm able to speak to so many people who don't know Jesus because of my love for shoes. And I'm able to talk to them. And kids, a lot of kids love shoes. And I'm able to have influence because my shoe game is strong, praise the Lamb. And but God uses the things that we like, and he uses it. And when we put what we like in his hands, it becomes a roar into these kids, and we can use it for his glory. And I think we're looking for the roar, but the roar is in the small things. The roar is in the prayer the 4 months before it. And then all of a sudden there's a moment where they invite you in to go deeper alongside their lives. But it's the partnership in the small things that makes the pathway for the big things.
Oh, that's good.
You know, I think, yeah, I did. Prior to coming to New Life, I was with Youth of the Mission for 8 years, and all my times there, we were working with young people. Came here, youth pastor here for 8 to 10 years, and so I've worked with young people a lot. And you know, some people have said, "Man, you got to be so thick-skinned to work with young people because it just seems, you know, you teach and you pouring your heart out there, and they just like." Yeah, and so, but going back to this place of knowing their name, knowing their story, and praying for them, I tell you, whenever I know the story of the kid who's like this, or the kid who seems so disengaged, and I go to a place of prayer for them, it kind of goes back to what you mentioned earlier, just my empathy level or my compassion just multiplies, and I recognize, gosh, that reaction that they're giving me or that which they're verbalizing, it's out of a place of insecurity. And so my grace quotient just went up here to where I'm just like, man, there's just such an insecurity that's coming out right now. And so in the way of just my approach or my engagement or my sensitivity with them, it's like you just have the grace. And I think one of the things that's important to know is oftentimes whenever a young person is, when they don't, sometimes we don't even know how to receive love. And when we don't know how to receive love, then we communicate everything that is opposite of that makes us uncomfortable. So sometimes it's just us changing, I think, our perspective and recognizing, even though they visibly don't look like they're receiving what, you know, your engagement or your love or your provision is for them, they actually are. You know, I know like there's individuals like Jackson, for example, one of our youth pastors, Cleanne, for example, you know, one of our worship directors here. There's Taylor Lee. There's a number of different students that I can think back over the years of youth pastoring where they just look so disengaged and so that they didn't want to be there, but they would, going back and having conversations, they're like, you know what, God was doing something tremendous, and your faithfulness or our leadership's faithfulness just made all the difference. Well, you know, as we continue to kind of unpack Nehemiah and look at Nehemiah as the chapters continued, we see where a group of individuals were inspired, you know, like they were inspired and challenged and excited at the idea of seeing the walls rebuilt. You know, I kind of view it like this in a lot of ways with children and students, is we're seeing the spiritual walls and the emotional walls of their lives rebuilt and restored. But as things got up halfway, there was the threat of the enemies of Israel. Sanballat and Tobiah were threatening them, and they actually had a ploy. They actually had a plan to end the work. And one of the things we talked about this last weekend was the idea of whenever you actually are a threat, the enemy is actually at work. There is an assignment. And sometimes if we don't feel a threat from the enemy, or if we don't feel an attack from the enemy, then perhaps we ourselves aren't a threat to the kingdom. But they reached this point where it seemed like all hope was gone, like they were going to have to give up. The enemy was coming. The enemy had a plot, a ploy to take their lives and destroy them. And all of a sudden, Nehemiah's great strategy was to place them by families in the gaps of the wall and to place mothers and fathers there at the forefront. And sort of what we discussed was the idea that the fight becomes a different kind of a fight. And so, Pastor Manuela, have you identified, or I guess perhaps somebody's watching today and they're like, all right, that's cool, that's great, put me in the gap, but what does that look like? What does it practically mean to become the spiritual leader for my family? Or another question to ponder and consider is, what could the church do? Maybe speak from a parent perspective rather than a pastor perspective. What could the church do to provide resources or options or training or what might it look like, or what could the church do for you as a parent, or Pastor Jamie, you as a parent, to help you be the spiritual leader or the champion in the life of your kids?
Backwards a little to your first question. I think, first of all, as we were talking, I'm reminded again of the analogy you give of Simba and Mufasa. And I think there's something there to it that the enemy sees in comparing it with Nehemiah, where he sees it as a threat. Because Simba, being tiny, has this little roar. But the enemy recognizes that you only got that little roar because you have Mufasa's DNA in you. At some point, your roar is going to be bigger. And so if the enemy can intimidate you now and make you never open your mouth again, but if he doesn't, one day you're going to realize who you are. And I think you made...
Go ahead, preach that Lion King, girl. Go preach that Lion King.
Well, I could go back and watch Lion King. But Pastor Liam, you made the point of once we can get the kids to realize not what they can do, but who they are. And I think for just as a parent, as a mom, it is, first of all, his strategy to position them by families, I think, had to be God. Because it doesn't make sense in warfare. Actually, you would want to protect the moms and the kids. Normally, they'd send them in out. But for some reason, like you said, every mom, and even if you have not had a mom, I don't want you to feel discounted at all. But there's this place of, I done carried you for 9 months. We made it through this birth process. Oh, no way. Like, that's when the mama comes, like, I don't care who you are. Does that thing come? The same thing comes up. I believe the Lord gives it for every one of us. And sometimes I think even spiritual moms, adopted moms, whatever, I think the beauty is how God can give you that same tenacity, and sometimes even more so. Like, I'll look at our kids. I look at my sister. She's a fierce aunt. In fact, the kids will choose her 90% of the time over mom because they know auntie will go to no limits for us. She loves us. She plays with us. Like, they have the fun, and then they have the added bonus of she's like, oh, no, but this is not happening. And that's something for everyone. If you're watching and you're a mom, it's in you. Not too long ago, I was speaking with a mom, and she was like, I feel like I don't know what to do. I don't have the degree for this. I said, Mom, you are the perfect one for this. God designed you, mom or dad. You are the best person to walk alongside your kid because it's personal. It's personal for you. As you were sharing the statistics on Sunday, we can hear it so quickly and it goes, like I can't even remember the exact figures, but it was when you said, by this time tomorrow, this is happening. It can be so distant if it's not my kid, but it totally changes when it becomes your kid. I mean, when have we prayed for prodigal kids in this house? And all of a sudden, because we know them, and I think that's where maybe the Lord has to start. If that's a prayer we want to pray, God, start making this as real to me, that this is my issue too. But
I think, there's different schemes of attack that happen in Nehemiah. And it's easy to feel that your voice becomes an echo chamber to your kid. Often. This morning, getting my son to school was a challenge. and a half, and my younger son is out of school because he's in kindergarten, but my other, and he's just like, I mean, I literally carry him downstairs, lay him on the couch, then we progress to the kitchen table where he lays down. I'm just like, Lord have mercy, and I just real thing, little subtle things that the Lord drops in my own heart. Change your strategy, come at it differently, like, because I'm getting frustrated. Like, I'm like, dude, get up. Like, 1, 2, 3. Like, you are not listening to me, you know. And I think as a dad, I want to fight for my kid, but I also want to fight for my kid to become who he's becoming. And so giving that space for those moments and letting him start to make choices. And it always shifts. Like, you don't want to break his spirit, but I'm trying to shift his will. And the Lord's strategy never looks like our strategy. And most of the time when we're parenting and we're frustrated, if we can just take that moment to slow down and say, God, what's your strategy? And I just want to talk to you, like, if you don't have kids in this season or you're not a grandparent, one thing that I learned this from Orange when Orange did their thing that they were here. They said there's a season in your life as a parent where your voice doesn't become the main voice in the kid's life. And so you have a season to be strategic. Like, for me, I have 2 single people who are at my house all the time. They're just family. And they're super influential in my kids' lives, where they'll talk to they're already starting to talk to my kid is talking to them more than they talk to us. It's a little frustrated. But having those influences and being strategic about them. So even for them, now we have people in our lives, in my family's life, that are fighting for my kids like they're their kids. Yeah. And they're not their kids, but they're their kids. And they own my kids like they're their kids. They take my kids when they have projects. They work with my kids. One of my friends comes over and just plays video games with my kids, like, because I'm not very good at them. I missed that wave of my life. And so I think God's strategy isn't our strategy, and we have to partner with his strategy, because it typically looks different than the way that we've heard and the way that we think. And there's moments that it's not always a big thing. It's like getting my kid to school this morning. I was just ready to put him over my knee and spoil the rod, spare the child. And so, but there was a subtle thing in my own heart this morning. The Lord said, change your strategy. And just really came at him and encouraged him and built with them, and he finally kind of got enough strength to get into the car to go to school, and I pray he's having an amazing day right now. But it's hearing the Lord's strategy, and he changes it. And it's something about being a part of a kid's life. If you're not a part of his life, your strategy you don't have a strategy because you're not a part. But as a parent, when he says do something and holding the wall for him, just because it's not always protecting them from the wall, but it's coaching them through what they have to walk through. Because you can't protect your kid from everything. It's just it's impossible. Honestly, the kids that are the most protected when they get out, they are the craziest. I'm just being honest. I deal with college-age students. I know which ones have been protected their whole life, because now they're experienced in everything. And so we have this ability to change the strategy and walk with them through this in this season.
Yeah, I know another one of the statements that we've quoted at times from this Orange Family Ministry philosophy. It says, 2 combined influences will have a greater impact than 2 independent or 2 individual influences. And so some of the strategy that we're going to be working tirelessly on this summer as a family ministry department to bring implementation to this fall is the idea of not the church as one entity of influence and recognizing the parents as another entity of influence as 2 separate influences, but what does it look like whenever they have this combined influence? You know, and Pastor Jeremy, you had mentioned the idea of other influences or other voices in the life of your children. I shared this story recently of a gentleman who talked about his daughter was a high school basketball player, and she had hit 10 3-pointers in a game, and he was just excited to celebrate her and knew all the affirmation that she needed to hear from her father celebrating her. And he went to her and he was just lavishing all these praises upon her, and she was like, hey, did my coach say anything though? And he goes, well, yeah, baby, but hear me whenever your dad says. And she goes, yeah, Dad, I hear you, but what about my coach? And there comes a season in the life of children where it's important to recognize that there's other validation and there's other voices in addition to the voice of the parents that are important. It doesn't make your voice less important. It's just saying in addition to that just the significance of it. And so, even in my own life, my son's about to turn 14 years old. And, I know my son loves the Lord. I know he has a sensitivity to the Holy Spirit and to others. He's tremendous. But there are times in a church service where I'm like, come on, man, like engage. And I try to find the balance between I don't want him performing, for the Lord or performing for me in the place of worship. But I want him to at least, learn respect and, it's time to worship. And so I'll be on him and he'll kind of stand and kind of do his thing. And there are times that he engages and then he'll sit back down. And so me and my wife both had kind of a few weeks back kind of been like, all right, bud. He's like, okay. And all of a sudden this guy, Zach, who's a youth leader, comes up. I don't even know if he saw Adrian and I do this, but at one point he comes and he puts his hands on Shiloh's shoulders in the place of worship. He goes, man, come on, brother, you got this. I'm watching you. Shiloh smiled, and what did he do? He stood up. And he engaged in the place of worship for the remainder of the worship service because there's other voices that's incredibly significant to have in the life of our children outside of just the parents. And so I think, perhaps you've already heard this, in the life of a child or student, they talk about the idea of influence from the church and from the parent. And they do this comparison of the 3,000 versus 40. They'll say that the church on average, this is just on average, has about 40 hours of influence a year in the life of a child or student, and recognizing that parents have, on average, 3,000 hours of influence. And so it would be silly on our part as individuals who desire to help pastor and shepherd a generation to say that, hey, we're the primary spiritual influence. No. We want to come alongside the 3,000 hours that parents and grandparents and aunties and uncles have available to help equip and resource you. So I just want to, if you're watching today and maybe you have heard this or haven't heard this, even just a practical example of what we at New Life are desiring to do here in the fall. For example, we're going to have this, we're going to call it Family Night. It's going to be on Wednesdays starting in the fall, every other week. For the entirety of the school year, for about 9 months, we'll have this family night, and there'll be something for the youth. There'll be a child care component for preschool. We're gonna have an elementary program. We'll have equipping classes for parents. We'll have equipping classes for grandparents, just kind of A to Z. But one of the things that we're doing that's kind of unique is for this Wednesday program, we're gonna take our elementary students, our elementary children, and we're gonna go through some doctrine, but we're gonna do it in a fun, creative sort of a way. It's gonna be every other week. But here's what we're going to do in addition to that. And this is one of the parts that I'm most excited about is we're going to make video resources. We're going to do, we're going to call them parent cues. It's kind of like cue cards. Every parent wants to be a better parent. And sometimes we just need to be cued on how to be a more significant parent. And so we're going to provide these parent cues to the parents. And on the alternating weeks, they're going to be provided the resources to be able to become the spiritual leaders and the spiritual champions in the life of their kids. One of the things I'm looking forward to, instead of having a salvation message that's rolled out by the children's pastor or the children's director, and then we have this spiritual salvation altar call for the kids, what we want to do this upcoming year is we want to prepare the parents and prep the parents as to this is what salvation looks like. This is what a relationship and intimacy with God looks like. And we want to prepare the parents, and we want to have a special night designed where we do present the gospel message, but we equip the parents to be able to walk their children through and to actually have this prayer time together and lead them into their commitment of making Jesus sort of their lives. And so just thinking, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, the beauty of the reality of knowing that it was my mom or it was my dad or it was my grandma or grandpa that led me in my relationship commitment with the Lord and the significance of that. And so we're going to work tirelessly. We're going to steward our time. We're going to steward the finances. We're going to steward the investment into this Imagine campaign now throughout the summer to prepare for this idea of making parents the spiritual leaders and spiritual champions of their families. the fourth point we identified this past weekend was we've got to shift and change the way that we view and treat kids and teenagers. I think a lot of times it's easy. Human nature is to see them as a distraction, or to see them as a burden, or to see them as I gotta bide my time. What do I got? I got 4 more years till he's out of the house, or I got 10 more years. I just gotta make it to bedtime. If I can just get him asleep, then I can actually enjoy my. It's just like, and so we kind of have this perspective. But one of the things that we presented was this idea: are they a burden? Are they an assignment? Are they a distraction, or are they an opportunity? And so even my wife and I, over the last couple of days, we've been challenged ourselves where there's that temptation to respond a particular way and say, you know what, this right now, this is an opportunity. And it's funny, the refining that happens in my own life, even during that season. But have you guys had any personal experiences, or is there any even practical tools or resources or anything that you would suggest to those watching today as to where we can create an intentionality of adjusting our view and our perspective and the way that we engage and treat children and teenagers?
Yeah, my wife is amazing at this. We have 4 little ones at home, 9, 6, 3, and 1. And oftentimes, I think it's Jim Gaffigan. There's like he says he has a 5th kid, and there's like, when you feel like you're drowning, just hand yourself another kid. That's what it feels like. And oftentimes it feels like we're drowning, we're running from thing to thing. I mean, I was away last week. I came back. I mean, we went to a graduation, 3 different play rehearsals, play recital things. And it was just, it was a crazy weekend. Had 2 birthdays on Saturday, and it's just like, you're literally just hurting children. You feel like a shepherd, which you're just shepherding kids to where they need to be all the time. And then you got 2 little ones that you're just like, come on, please, don't poop in your pants, potty training. And I think my wife models this in my home probably, I think, better than me. Is I don't know if you can do this without the place of prayer. And as a stay-at-home mom with the little ones there, it seems like, well, when do you have time to pray, right? You're drowning. When is that time actually real? And so my wife has created moments that are consistent of the place of prayer that helps you recalibrate and come at this. And she asks for forgiveness a lot. If you're a parent, it's pretty normal that you've done things out of anger. Maybe you haven't. Maybe it's just me. Anger, whatever it is, selfish ambition, all this stuff, and laying down your life. I mean, this is so practical of the gospel, of laying down your life for this being that needs you in your own home. And so I've seen my wife full of compassion. She's slow to anger. Yet it comes out, slow. She's abounding in love. Like, she has these qualities of God inside of her, and she's had to learn in this season. She gets up super early to pray, if that works for her. Some nights she was up all night, so that is not a reality. But she's learned to create moments of intimacy with the Lord that recalibrates her through the day. Whether she listens to a book, whether she's listening to a prayer set, whether she's doing the other things in the midst of it. And it may just be a 2-second prayer. Maybe it's a 5-minute prayer. Maybe she goes to the bathroom and shuts the door for a moment. They're banging on the door, Mama! And she's like, Jesus, I need you. But like I think my wife models this in our home extremely well. And it's taught me, even in my own things, because there's moments where I can't stand when my kids disrespect my wife. And so like and I have to recalibrate and understand that it's more than the moment. There's something else there. And like, I get to disciple this young being. As a pastor, I get to disciple a lot of people, but I have a unique opportunity to disciple these 4 kids, and they see all sides of me. When I'm exhausted, they see dad exhausted. They see dad at his best. They see dad at his worst. And so I have to learn to turn it on when I'm home. I don't check out when I'm home, which is easy to do. But I think one of the biggest keys is one of the things that I think you didn't mention this, but we're really trying to partner with parents well. And sometimes it's not just doing it at home. It's just encouraging you. Like, just to be encouraged as a parent, you're not going to die. You're going to make it. Your kid is not, like, I mean, literally, guys, Pastor Dan had meetings about me in the church, and I'm a pastor. Like, this is weird. Like, the Lord does it. The Lord's working. And when we choose, I think one of the biggest keys in this, when we choose to partner with the Lord as a parent, the Lord is a better parent than you are. He's a better father. He makes it very clear. Even if we try to give our best gifts, his gifts are better. And so when we partner with him, and it's learning the intimacy, and you can be drowning, but you can have intimacy with the Lord, even in the midst of the moments. The Lord knows your life better than you know your life. And let that be your recharge. And I think, and if you're single and you're doing this, get in a community of a church. If you're married, get your spouse to encourage you. Tell them that you need encouragement. Like, I need to encourage my wife. I can list scriptures. I'm done. I'm going to start preaching. Go ahead, Pastor Manuela.
Totally. I think just to add to it in terms of seeing the kids, and the teens more than what they look like, one of the things I've realized is to start to call the kids into a higher place. And so I've realized kids will step up to the opportunity. Like, when you actually look at them and say, no, you can do this. You can actually do it. They're like, oh, let me show you what I can. Sometimes they'll even surprise you. Versus sometimes they're like, oh, you're just a kid. It's almost like we're saying, I don't expect anything more out of you. And so that's something I try to keep in mind, at least, with our kids. And then something else I don't so much think of it, but they help me in this, is one of the things is we tell them the story of how they came to be. And they've been fascinated with it. And in a beautiful way, all 3 of ours, there's unique circumstances surrounding before even their birth, or, the process, or right after they're born. And so often I have to go back and I say, Lord, I remember these circumstances that are surrounding this particular child. There's greatness in this child. There's something you want to do in them. And when I remind them, tell them, this is what God has spoken concerning your life, every time I feel like I even see something in their eyes of, there's something I'm here to do. And that I've seen with my kids. I can tell from my kids, there's a purpose here. I'm here for something. There's only the one of me. And we something we've tried to do at home is, you're not too little to give an input. And so sometimes even it could be some sort of a decision. I'm like, well, what do you think about it? And they're like, oh, I'm part of the decision. Now, you're really not part of the decision making, but you think you are, But it's just something in them going, I actually do have something to offer. I am wise. I can speak into the situation. I just realized every time you call them forward or call them up into something, they really do. And they realize God can do something with me. And finally, my own personal thing of our season of Imagine that I've just been praying about, saying, what do I imagine? What do I want to be inspired to imagine? I keep saying, Lord, I imagine kids, our new life children, not just being ones who can tell us the stories that happened in the Bible. Not that, in David and Goliath and Esther, whatever. I actually imagine our children in a few years to come being identical examples of these scriptures. Like, I'm looking to see the Esthers and the Deborahs and the Davids, the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Like, I'm looking forward to, a few months down the road and we hear a 9th grader going in the hallway. Oh, no, I don't care what the world says. I'm not. Like, to me, yes, we got them. And then they'll inspire. That's it.
So good. I know for us in our household, we've tried to do similar things of just reminding our kids who they are. I think, so much of everything goes back to identity and who we are, and reminding them again who our God is and who they are in Christ. And so, if you're a parent or grandparents or even single, you're working with kids or teenagers. I think another thing that I've found is I've tried to ask students before, hey, what's your name mean? They don't know. And so sometimes I'll just pull out my cell phone right there and I'll look whether, it's a Hebrew name, a spiritual name. I'll look until I find an attribute or a characteristic, and I call it out within them. And so I constantly am reminding, our kids, hey, Shiloh, you're God's gift. You're a precious sacrifice. That's who you are. Or I'll remind Haven she's a safe place, or I'll remind Eden just, you are peace, you are joy. It was a cool story this past, about 2 weekends ago, I had the opportunity to be able to baptize my youngest, Haven. Her middle name is Ariel, and it means Lioness of God. And I actually, after baptizing her, both Pastor Manuela and Jeremy's wife, Becca, both came up to her in independent scenarios and settings. I think it was Becca actually said to her, she said, Haven, I know at times you can tend to be a little on the bashful side, but I feel like God is calling you to be his lioness. And she had no idea what her middle name was or the significance. So we were to come right behind that and say, see, Haven, remember. And then Pastor Manuela, you were calling out boldness within her. And so I think, those seeds of reminding them of their identity or who they are. And so even, as I drop my kids off at school, Pastor Jeremy, you talk about modeling repentance and forgiveness, and vice versa, asking your kids for forgiveness, but also modeling to them, forgiveness. And so on some of my most stressful, crazy mornings on the drive to school, what am I doing? I'm asking for repentance. Guys, would you forgive me for Dad's attitude today? Adrian always says I'm calm, cool, collective until I'm not. I'm kind of at a 1 and then I go to a 10. There's no in between for me. And so I'm constantly asking for repentance and praying for them and trying to model that. But even as they get out of the car, almost every day I say, guys, don't forget who you are. And I try to remind them who they are. Guys, you are the ones whom Jesus loves. And so I think for us, to kind of bring a little bit of conclusion to some of this idea of seeing and treating, children and teenagers differently. It's the idea of us first asking for God's heart for them, us identifying how God sees them, changing the way that we see them, and then reminding them, pulling out, as you're saying, elevating them to who, and they'll respond. Guys, there are seeds planted deep, and you might not see the response day 1, week 1, month 1, year 1, but there are things that are being said that will bear fruit over years to come. And so we're excited for these next several weeks to see what God is going to do in our church. And guys, I believe with all my heart, I mentioned this last weekend, I believe we're going to look back and 2027 and 2032 and 2040 and beyond, and we're going to recognize that there was something incredibly significant that took place in 2021 in the life of New Life Church, and it's the investment and the shift, the pivot, if you will, that we're making to see New Life Church become a family-focused, family-centered church. Well, as we wrap up today, Pastor Jeremy, would you mind closing us in prayer?
I'd love to. God, we thank you for the grace and the mercy, God, to make this pivot. God, we thank you that not one soul, God, old or young, will be left behind in this process. God, we thank you that you are in the midst of it, God, and we pray, God, that parents would be rejuvenated. God, that singles would find purpose. God, that grandmas and grandpas would be refueled and refired, God. God, that young ones would begin to lead the way. God, we thank you that even in the midst of revival, God, often it starts within young folks. So, God, we just pray for revival in this church within young people, God, that they would be on fire for the name that is above every name, which is you, Jesus. God, we thank you for what you're doing. God, we thank you that this is not a typical strategy, but, God, it's your strategy. God, and we lean into you as a church and say, God, do your will. God, we choose to partner fully with your heart. God, even where it's uncomfortable. God, we say yes to you. In Jesus, we love you. We bless you. In Jesus' name, amen.